All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kiana. I'll be helping moderate this event. We have a great set of alumni panelists here to share their experience and answer your questions on the topic of nonprofit careers. As we go through this presentation, please feel free to type your questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature, and we'll go ahead and call on you. And we're going to jump right in. So we'll get started by asking each of the alumni to give a brief overview of their career path and their current role, and then we'll open it up to questions from students. All right, Eric, you can go ahead and take the floor.
Super, thank you. My name is Eric Greiling. I got my degrees at UW-Madison, BA in English Lit and in communication arts with a radio, television, film focus. And I think we still have those media, radio, television, and film, and there are a few more media since then besides. I think it's also relevant that I was involved with the Daily Cardinal, writing at the Cardinal, and working with Wisconsin Union Theater and University Theater a little bit, just to, do a lot of things on campus. I was really interested in the arts, writing, all kinds of different arts. So briefly, after that, I went into theater, mostly technical theater, producing theater, building sets, things like that, and a lot of different things. It's possible to be specialized in theater, but it's also possible to do almost a little bit of everything in theater. And for me, that resulted in about a 20-year career in theater of kind of moving through tech work into production management, tour management, general management, capital project planning, and as part of capital project planning, becoming involved with the board of directors and eventually getting involved in fundraising and development work, which is where I've spent the last 15 years of my career doing development work, fundraising, first with full-time with University of Wisconsin Foundation on behalf of the School of Education, including several arts and arts-related departments, art, dance, theater joined just as I was leaving. And now I'm Director of Development, Chief Development Officer, and Executive Director of the Friends Group at PBS Wisconsin, which is a really terrific role. I manage all of our different kinds of fundraising. I'm not going to list them now because I'm going to run out of 2 to 3 minutes, but I manage all of that, and I'm part of the leadership team of the station as well. So I get to collaborate very much interdepartmentally, be a part of strategic decision making, strategic plan setting, and manage a not-for-profit organization at the same time. So I guess I'd really appreciate any questions that people might have about development work and fundraising, because certainly when I was a 21-year-old student and even past that, I never really recognized fundraising as an interesting career choice, but I really value how vital it is to our artistic and cultural endeavors. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. We look forward to hearing more from you. We'll go with Kate next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Maloney. I graduated in 2007 in political science with a certificate in criminal justice. Actually started my career path or my school path as thinking I was going to be a geologist. So I definitely, even within an undergraduate, went on different roads to get where I am today. After graduating, I started working at the School of Education at Wisconsin, and I really enjoyed the academic setting. I enjoyed being able to work with students, with faculty and staff. And my husband, who went to Wisconsin as well, he had an opportunity to start his engineering career either in Seattle or Chicago. And since I was not tied down to a specific career yet, we moved down to Chicago. So that was in about 2008, not a great time to be starting new jobs, a lot of economic depression happening at that time. And I started at a nonprofit that did a a conference out in Las Vegas for component pieces for electronics. And it's not the big electronic show out there. It's a smaller one, but it's really interesting because you're still working with people who are very passionate about what they do. And I really enjoyed that sort of nonprofit work. Unfortunately, because of the timing, they went out of business. I started working at another organization that was another nonprofit. They did survey work and data analysis for other nonprofits and government organizations. For instance, we did a survey with the Chicago Housing Authority, sending surveys out to the residents there to get their take on how they were feeling, the Housing Authority was doing, what improvements could be made. And then we took that data back, analyzed it, and was able to provide a report to the Chicago Housing Authority. So again, really meaningful work being done, but also a non-for-profit, and due to the timing, they went out of business. I found myself at a place that would look for college placements for student athletes. Not all student athletes in high school are able to play at Division I levels. They want to play at Division II, Division III. And so I worked at a place that would help those athletes find a college that works well for them, both academically and athletically. I was very big into sports policy. I went to DePaul University and got my master's in public policy and specializing in sports policy, which is why I found myself there. But having not been a college athlete myself, there were limitations to what I could do there. And so I found myself looking for jobs that were at a stable organization. And I really wanted to get back into that academic setting. And still being in the Chicago area, I applied for a position in the Alumni Relations and Development Office at Northwestern University. And I have been at Northwestern in their development office for over 8 years now. And I have been able to expand my role exponentially since I've been here. I now manage a team of about 4 people, and we do user services for those people that are using our database, that are using our software, that are using our IT functionality. So I've used my degree from Letters in Science, which was political science, yes, but so much into problem solving and analytics and project management, and I was able to merge it into something that I was actually really good at, but I didn't know I was going to be good in this like data analytical world until I started going down that path. And I'm going to stay here for a while. I really enjoy working at Northwestern because, again, it's kind of that academic setting where you know you're doing something really meaningful. And when you find something that you're also good at, it feels good. And especially it feels good to know that Northwestern is not going to go out of business anytime soon, especially now that Rebecca Blank will be the president at Northwestern starting next summer. So I feel pretty good about that Northwestern had to steal somebody from Wisconsin. That's always a good thing. So I think that's a pretty good brief introduction for myself.
Thank you so much, Kate. Tony, you're next.
I'm Tony Singleton. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree from the Center for Development, which is now part of the La Follette School. And that would have been in 1973. My career really started when I joined the Peace Corps. And that was probably the most important piece of my life. From 1967 to 1969, I was a volunteer in Morocco. And because of the way government sometimes work, I was trained in agriculture. I grew up in a suburb of Boston. So unlike a lot of people who went to school in Wisconsin, I probably had seen one live cow in my entire life before I went to Morocco. But what happened was I'm good in languages, and I learned a couple of languages, French and Arabic. And I got excited about international work, which is why when I came back, I applied to University of Wisconsin. And after I graduated, I had actually some really good job offers at State Department, but I chose to be the Deputy Director of Peace Corps in Tunisia, which is a foreign service position, but is not a career path. And that was also interesting, useful, kind of a little bit like a nonprofit kind of position, but not quite. And after I finished that, I sold out. I joined Chase Manhattan Bank. I worked from 1977 to 1985 in international lending. And then from 85 to 97 in global risk management. I ran teams in London, New York. And when I finished in 1997, I'm sorry, I realized that what I wanted to do was something really useful. The bug that I got when I was 21 years old, joining the Peace Corps, had never really been filled. So a company which is a for-profit called Development Alternatives Incorporated, based in Bethesda, hired me to run a state-owned bank in Tanzania. It was the largest bank. It had 108 branches. It was a basket case, frankly. And the goal was to get it to the point where we could privatize it, which I did. It became very profitable, in fact, in just a few years while I was there. And it kind of got me involved in a product called microfinance, because that's one of the credit products that we started to offer. It had nothing to do with my background, zero. All my work in finance had been at the wholesale, big ticket level, dealing with Fortune 500 CFOs, that kind of thing. So I guess two parts to this that I want to tie it off with. One, when I was at Wisconsin, because I studied economic development as my main focus, I realized that countries were exposed to negative terms of trade, meaning that commodity countries like exist in Africa and in Southeast Asia tend to have depreciating currencies over time. And there's nothing that they could do to hedge their risk. The product that we innovated in my career at Chase was commodity derivatives. And it was literally driven by the need for people to hedge their commodities out 10 years, particularly oil and natural gas. And the second piece, while I was at Chase, on the lending side, I realized that we were just missing so much in the countries we operated under in terms of financial inclusion. We only lent to large companies, usually multilaterals. So once I started getting involved with microfinance, I realized that I had found the perfect match. This was the way to include the poorest segment globally, usually predominantly women, and it really worked. It really worked well. So I ended up finishing my career at Finca, which is now Finca Impact, I think, but Finca International was the name. And I ran 5 affiliates in Africa. I was chairman of the board. We had about 1,500 employees, all local virtually. There were only a few expatriates. And it was probably the most fun I've ever had in my life. It wasn't easy. It was very challenging, both physically and professionally, but great times. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Tony. And last but not least, Meg.
Yes, I'm Meg Turbo, and it's kind of nice that I'm coming up last because I'm seeing something that ties us all together, which is none of us went into education knowing where we were going to end up. So none of us landed quite doing the thing that we started out. I started out at actually UW Whitewater and transferred up to Madison. And at that time, I was just doing, I thought I wanted to go into business. I thought I wanted to go into international relations. I thought I wanted to go into, I was going to major in this language. I changed my major, I think, 10 times before I finally landed on English creative writing. And then I added journalism along the line. So that's what I graduated with and started working at the Badger Herald, not the Daily Cardinal as Eric did. And really, one of the things that I ended up focusing on, especially when I was working there as a state news editor, was environmental issues that were really big. And I didn't realize that that was going to end up kind of coming around again and again in a lot of the work that I've done. So I ended up working for a couple of newspapers after I graduated, and then I was working for a magazine as an editor. I should mention that I did not do a nice straight 4-year shot. I dropped out, came back, and it took me a few years before I got around to getting my undergrad degree. And then I was, after I was working as an editor it was actually a business magazine, I ended up landing a job at the Department of Natural Resources as an editor. And over time, as I was editing a lot of these scientific and research documents that had a lot of background in the environmental sciences, this thing that I'd been interested in when I was working at the newspaper, I ended up becoming a watershed planner. And so I worked in actually collecting all the research and gathering the documents that we needed to do to characterize the conditions of various watersheds throughout the state. When I had my son, I backed off on all that work and started freelancing for newspapers, magazines, and a variety of other things, including the DNR. And so I was also writing some of the same work that I was doing for them at that time. I also started a farm and decided I was going to do that for a while, and got very much involved in some of the organic growing and the like. And as time went on, I kind of was doing my creative writing and selling stories and getting interested in some of these things. And I decided I needed a little bit more background. So I took a couple of courses at UW as a special student, and they kind of kept blossoming. I didn't really plan this, but suddenly I was being told I was not allowed to take any more courses unless I planned to declare a major. And because I was just taking all these, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll go to school in archaeology and anthropology. And so I ended up accidentally, more or less, because they weren't going to let me sign up unless I was registered now, getting my master's in archaeology. And as I was doing that, I became more and more interested in an environmental issue that touched on anthropology, which was a mining issue in northern Wisconsin that involved Native American impacts, et cetera. So I ended up going on and getting my degree, of all things, back in mass communications, journalism and mass communications, with minors in folklore and anthropology. So all of that was great. I was teaching science writing after I graduated with my PhD. And I thought that was all fine until certain budget cuts led to some changes in what I was going to be able to do anymore. And I landed a job at the Wisconsin Humanities Council. And it's a nonprofit organization that gives out funds to people who are doing humanities-based activities throughout the state. So we get federal funding and some state funding and some other donations, and we do some of our own programs. And among those, we're giving grants just across the state, all kinds of different projects to various different nonprofit organizations. But they all have to have humanities as part of it. And some of those can be issues that are more things that people are trying to answer questions in their communities, but it might be for something that might be an art that has deeper questions that people are focusing on, or it might be a festival or things like that. So we've done a lot of that kind of funding. So I did not anticipate being a grant program director, but at the same time, I also added on to this. I'm working as a project manager for a program called Beyond the Headlines, which brings journalism, And right now we're focusing on climate change and water impacts. So it all kind of comes full circle over time. And I think my biggest lesson for all this was sort of follow my heart a little bit. And if something looks interesting, stay curious. And you never know when that's going to pop back up and be important to what you're doing and where you land. So that was kind of it in a nutshell, I guess.
Thank you so much, Meg. That is introductions from all of our alumni. So I will encourage students who are in this call to, again, either type out your questions or use the raise hand feature, and we'll call on you to ask those. But a question that I have is, so several of the alumni here have experience in development and fundraising. Can you talk about the important skills you have used doing this kind of work, and also maybe talk about some of the things you like most about this work?
Maybe I get to go first again, but we can mix that up later. You know, I'm a big fan of the liberal arts degree. I mean, the letters and science literature on the value of a liberal arts degree is pretty much how I feel about it. So I'm happy to, you know, propagandize that. But I think development really calls on a wide variety of skill sets, and, you know, elements of majors from across campus. When we talk about development internally, I often talk about, and others do too, the art and science of development work. So there's a lot of science that goes into it, especially on the planning end. If you have a large pool of potential donors, and let's say that's 100,000 people, and you know that you really only have the capacity to talk meaningfully one-on-one with, say, 120 of them in a year, how do you find the best 120 out of 100,000? You need analytical skills. You need, you know, a lot of different ways to work with data and understand data. And then on the art side, you know, that's communication. It's a certain amount of psychology. It's empathy, which is harder to teach, but something that a person learns through a student career at UW-Madison. You know, it's a lot of kind of soft skills or humanities skills, certainly writing skills, speaking skills, argument, and I don't mean contradicting or fighting, but creating a persuasive argument, being able to construct a coherent statement and build out a case statement and a cause, to do that in very few words or very many words, to use a lot of detail or a little detail to understand who you're talking to and pitch that right to them, and then have a thorough understanding of your content. You know, whether you're like me and you could be working, you know, at the School of Education. The School of Education, you could be working with teaching, educating, psychology, kinesiology, the arts, you know, a wide variety of fields. Can you develop enough of an understanding of those fields to be able to represent them? Can you represent the strategy and the mission of the university to different kinds of audiences and different kinds of people? Kind of same thing over in public television. Lots of different material, lots of different content. And we have a pretty bold mission statement and a vision for what we want to do and who we want to serve. So, you know, all those different kind of skills, you know, go into development. And that's what makes it interesting to somebody like me. You know, it's not just one thing that you master, like spreadsheets or accounting, which is really valuable. And that's something I need to have at least some understanding of. But for me, you know, I'd lose interest if that was all I was doing. Being able to draw on a lot of different skill sets and learn them as I go is one of the things I find compelling about development work.
I was going to add to what you've got to say from the other perspective of fundraising, which is, as the grant program director, I'm receiving the grants that are coming from people who are doing fundraising. One of the things that I provide is some guidance in how they're developing the various different programs that they're doing, and thinking about how they evaluate those programs and think about where the humanities come in that. But it also is requiring people to be good writers. I need to have them be able to tell us exactly what it is that they want to accomplish with the funds that I'm going to give them. And it's working with them to kind of be creative about thinking about where they need those funds. So one of the things that we often are giving money for is people to bring in somebody who's an expert in their field so that they can talk about these different projects, or things that'll say a speaker who's going to be doing a talk after a Shakespeare performance or something like that. So there's a lot of different things that come into that, and there's a skill set both in the asking for money, but also in the evaluating and deciding whether or not you're going to give the money.
Yeah, and I would just add, definitely on the data end of the development spectrum for the position that I'm in. And as Eric was saying about, you have a big pool. How do you whittle that down? A lot of that takes data and how you look at that data. What are the interests of the donors? What should you, as possibly a fundraiser or a gift officer, be talking to potential donors about? Because you want to meet them where their interests are. Because a lot of times, especially, major gift donors, they want to give to something that they are passionate about. So how do you find out what they're passionate about? So even in fundraising, there are people that will just do research on potential donors to figure out what is their wealth capacity, where have they spent other contributions, where have they made other donations, are there interests that you can find that are tailored to whatever organization that you may be working with, that a donor could potentially see a lot of value giving to your organization. So there's a lot of thought process that goes into it. And even though I'm not on the front lines of development, from my experience working with those people, anyone can be a gift officer. You don't have to be an extrovert to do it. You don't have to feel like you are a people person to do it. It really is about relationship management and feeling that, it is a cause that is worth doing. I have worked with people that are fundraising for Northwestern's School of Engineering. And when they get to have conversations with faculty and staff there about what that school is trying to achieve for their students, it really gives them a lot of energy of like, this is really important work. It motivates the gift officers to find those donors that believe in the same cause. And I think that's really important. So it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or extrovert, you don't necessarily love asking people for money. It's really about asking them to benefit something that you also believe in.
I'd like to add a perspective from the different angle where the stuff that I was doing, I actually had to turn down money from donors. And so as an operational person, there's a real duty to make sure that your mission isn't driven by money that's coming in. So that's the other angle, is if you're working for a nonprofit and it has a particular set of goals, set of missions, sometimes you actually have to turn down money, and you have to make sure that you stay true to the mission, because otherwise you're going to destroy the value of that particular operation, the particular nonprofit. Someone had mentioned sustainability. I'm a huge fan of sustainability, and I guess it really comes down to that overlap between the business skills of a for-profit and the mission of a nonprofit. A nonprofit really is just a tax, it's a tax designation. It just means there's no beneficial ownership. But you can have businesses that do the same thing, either for-profit or nonprofit. And both of those have to stay close to what they set out to do. And money is not really the driver here. It's really the mission and whether you get the ability to keep it sustainable.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your varying perspectives. It brings a lot of insight to the conversation. The next question that I have is, can you discuss some of the differences that you've experienced or noticed between working in nonprofits versus for-profit or the private sector?
I would like to start with that because the misconception of the business, and I kind of alluded to it, is that both for-profit and nonprofit have to have efficiencies. They have to have metrics that measure what they're trying to do, and they have to have people that are good at what they do. And in that case, you know, there's similarities. The dissimilarities tend to be a couple of things. What I found was that executives at the nonprofit are paid a fair amount of money. I was fortunate financially that when I went into nonprofit, I was already at an executive level. But what I noticed was that a lot of people right out of school were not paid very well. That's one of the differences between nonprofit and for-profit. Part of it has to do with skill sets. So what I saw were a lot of people, highly educated people who worked for Finca right out of business school or undergraduate at good schools, and they wanted to do something good and useful, but they actually didn't have the skills required to be paid for what they wanted to do. You know, a number of us have learned on the job. We were fortunate to be able to have a very broad background, and we were able to progress through that. And I just want to add that that's, you know, you have to pay your dues sometimes. So that's both in for-profit and nonprofit. But I saw a lot of similarities in well-run nonprofits and in well-run businesses. It all still comes back to good management, good metrics, keeping to the mission, making it sustainable.
I just would note that, you know, as Tony mentioned, the nonprofit is kind of a big umbrella. And so you can have anybody that's, you know, you can have a huge nonprofit that has, you know, thousands of people working for it versus some of the smaller shops where I work, you know, there are only 8 employees. So one of the, you know, the differences that I would see is besides that income level, I think that there's also a mission-driven issue. When you're working for a nonprofit, you tend to have a more narrow mission. And your mission is to really not bring that money in the door to build money so much as to distribute it, is to do whatever the work is that you're hoping to do. And so I think a lot of people end up feeling pretty passionate about the work that they're doing when they're working for a nonprofit that might not feel quite as strongly about if you're working for a for-profit organization. Government actually falls in there as a form of a nonprofit as well. And when you're working for government, it has sort of the same kinds of issues that you might have working for for a for-profit business, which is that you don't necessarily feel as if you have the same mission all the time as the organization that you're working for. If you're working for a business, the purpose of the business is to make an income. They do something, make a widget, whatever, but the goal is to have an income come out of that for the organization. For government, you know, you're being directed, and often political choices can make a difference in what one does or does not do for a job and how you advance in it, et cetera. When considering a nonprofit, you also need to think about the size of the nonprofit that you're working for, because you might not find that you can advance at the same level. There's only in a small shop, for example, there's only so high you can go. You can't all be in charge of everything. And so, you know, there's not as much maybe mobility in some of these organizations when it comes to those kinds of experiences. But the nonprofit can also be a really great place to kind of figure out what you want to do and where you want to be. So I guess my thought was that by being curious and having a lot of interests besides just the thing that you kind of focus on in your education, by having those outside interests, sometimes you end up landing someplace where you feel like it isn't all about what you're earning and what your career path is, as much as it is maybe being really happy with the work that you're doing and feeling that contentment in your own accomplishments.
Wonderful, thank you. My next question for you all is, what are some things you wish you had known at your time of graduation that have been valuable in your career?
Really, that it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary when you may not have a job lined up for graduation, and some industries are very different. My husband's went into engineering. He was interviewing for positions when he was still in school, but that, engineering, I think, is a little different. They had a lot of job fairs. They are pushing people to have something right after graduation. That's not always the case for every single industry out there. And I think you just have to have a calm sense that it will work out, as long as you're doing your own due diligence and making efforts to figure out what you want to do. And you're not going to be you most likely will not find your dream career, within first few years after graduating. You're probably going to hop through a few different things to figure out what you're good at, what you don't like. Having a job and figuring out you don't like it is almost as valuable as having a job and figuring out that you do like it. It's certainly not easy to go to different jobs. It can be very exhausting. I think through my tenure of working at places that unfortunately went out of business, I had like 6 or 7 jobs within 7 or 8 years. That was really exhausting. I did not love it, but you get through it, and each experience gives you something else to build on, leads you down a different, more direct path. And if I didn't have those, there's no reason I would know exactly what I want at this point. So I think allowing yourself some flexibility and being confident about your skills as well. Not every job application that you read is going to fit what you think you can do perfectly. If you fit 60, 70, 80% of that, I would say don't hesitate to try, right? Don't think you have to meet 100% of the requirements to think that you can do a specific job that is of interest to you.
For me, go ahead, Tony. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I just like to pass on something. When I went out to Wisconsin, I had $50 over my first semester tuition, and I had just got married. And if it hadn't been for the housing department providing me literally a place that it was a professor who had gone on sabbatical, it was a palace we moved into for 1 semester, and then me getting assistantship that paid for my tuition, made me in-state tuition, eligible. I'll tell you, it just, my fondness for Wisconsin is huge. And I think that kind of experience puts you in a sort of risk-taking ability mode. And that's what I would say to students, is that if you don't take risk, you're probably not going to get rewards. But if you take risk, you're also going to find that there's big surprises in your future. So I think all of us have gone through various ups and downs, but you'd be surprised what you've learned at Wisconsin. You'd be surprised how prepared you are. And it's not just the academics. You get that anywhere.
Yeah, I'll just build on that a little bit. In development, we say the number one reason for not receiving is not asking. So don't be shy about asking people about their jobs or their careers. If you meet somebody, build a network. If you feel like networking is not what you want to do, call it something else. But I think it's really helpful to build a network. If you meet somebody interesting and you want to find out more about what they do, maybe that's not a career for you or you don't think it is, invite them to coffee or something anyway, and just, say, tell me more about that. Because people by and large really like to talk about the work that they do and what they believe in and what the mission they've dedicated themselves toward is, and really respond to that. I mean, even if they seem like, somebody who's way too executive to talk to somebody in their early 20s who's just getting started, chances are they'd love a chance to talk about it, and it's meaningful for them too. Certainly in the Badger network, that's absolutely true. I have one other thing that I didn't know, and maybe this is me not being naive, but that it's actually helpful to be planful about your career, to be thinking about what you want to do next, and to start exploring that, and think a couple years ahead. I really like what I'm doing right now. I couldn't imagine leaving it. Oh, wait a minute. In 3 to 4 years, I might have to. I should start looking at what's next for me and making sure that I'm ready for that. Because, the last thing you want is to be ready for the next thing, only to find out the people who are hiring aren't so sure about that. And, like the others were saying, your skill set that you're developing at this university is so valuable. It there's little things that you can do to make sure that you're perceived that way in the job market too. So those are a couple things that I think are good early lessons that certainly weren't obvious to me when I started.
And I think, kind of building a little bit on what Kate was saying as well, is kind of that understanding that things might change and change without any warnings, that go into it wide open and be willing to apply for a job that you're not necessarily when somebody lists a job, they want the perfect candidate, but they're not going to get the perfect candidate, so they're going to look for people who come as close as they possibly can. And so the other thing I would say in relation to that is really build your interviewing skills, because from the experience that I've had with that is somebody who interviews very well is going to open a door faster than somebody can be the most qualified person that there is, but somebody who warms up a room or is comfortable talking about themselves, et cetera, is going to sometimes beat them out, just because the people who are interviewing them can picture themselves working with that individual better. So taking opportunities to practice how to interview, finding those friends, et cetera. I think I learned a lot about doing that from just various different classes that I had that actually talked about how do you approach some of these things? How do you prepare for interviews? How do you prepare to put your best foot forward? Because a lot of times, a lot of people aren't comfortable selling themselves that hard. And I think that that's one of the things that really helps a lot. I know it's always been uncomfortable for me to be able to say, this is what I do and I'm good at it, because you always feel like somebody else is going to stand there and go, but wait a minute, I'm better than you at that. And it puts you in the position of having to try to prove it. So just trying to learn how to sell yourself, that's part of that networking. It's part of that concept of being willing to apply for something that you might not be the 100% perfect candidate for, and really just practicing a lot of those skills before going in.
Thank you so much for those responses. Those were incredibly insightful and helpful for me, even not going into nonprofits, but still very helpful. The next question that I have for you all is, I'm curious what the most rewarding or satisfying parts of your work are.
I answer that right now. For the work that I do is basically seeing a really good idea come to fruition. So I'm not doing some of these projects, I'm helping people accomplish a project. And when the kinds of comments that come out of the program that they've run are, people had their eyes open to something that they weren't aware of, that they felt a deeper connection to their communities, that they had this better connection with their colleagues, or an idea, or it sparked more ideas. That's the thing that I find really rewarding, is knowing that I've made a difference in helping them build a better program and helping them get that funded. I've always had that idea of a mission of making things better. And I think that kind of helps me feel like I've accomplished that.
I'm retired, so I've been involved with mentoring students at Princeton, actually, the Keller Center for Innovation. And there's one of the things that I felt I missed was mentoring. I didn't have any mentors. I mean, later in my career, there were people that gave me advice, but I've made it my mission to share as much of what I've learned and help people, particularly in innovation and being comfortable with going out and doing stuff. So there's a particular student who I'm very much involved in. He's a graduate from Princeton, but he was losing his eyesight, and he has a rare eye disease. His goal was to go to law school, and a few of us started mentoring him and suggesting that that's probably not going to work. To cut to the chase, there's 3 of us who've actually helped him start low-cost housing business. It's a for-profit in Jackson, Mississippi. And his grandparents were very active in the civil rights. His family's well known in Mississippi for civil rights action. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, he started we've got a house that's been bought. He's lived under extremely bad conditions. He hasn't had a lot of money for food. He doesn't have a vehicle, but he's pushed on, and we've got some money that's being put into this thing. Obviously, it's not going to be a huge return, but it's those kinds of things that I feel good about, which is giving back, because I feel I've been really lucky. So that's, and my work at Finca was all about giving back. It certainly wasn't about the money. It was about seeing, particularly the poorest people on the planet actually being able to borrow money and build businesses, small businesses, to support their family, pay for education, those things.
I would kind of piggyback on what Meg was saying, and just seeing a problem solved gives me a lot of satisfaction in my current job. And some of that's really minor things. Some of it is one of my users doesn't know that there is a button that they can click to get to what they want. And it's just making sure that I can help staff members do their job better, or we can problem solve because there is something that's missing from our business process, from our data collection. Okay, what are the steps that we need to do to make sure that the rest of the staff can achieve their goals on their team? And if I can help do that, that's really great, right? I'm not doing it for myself. Most of my job is project management for other people to be able to get their job done. But when it works, it feels really good, because it is something concrete that you can say, I did that. I'm not constructing a house. I'm not doing anything that you can build and say, woo, I see it. It's concrete. It's there. But some of these project management, some of these other things that are happening, there is something tangible that you can see that has been accomplished. And for me, that makes me feel good at the end of the day.
Yeah, maybe for me, it's pretty similar. I feel like in development now and with the university, there are both tangible moments and intangible moments, and that's led to some, celebrations that are pretty equal for really big things and also really small things, you know, like working on a really big gift or grant and being successful. That's a pretty natural moment to feel accomplished and celebrated. I think more specifically, it's when the missions come together. You know, donors certainly feel a tremendous amount of joy when they've made a gift that's personally meaningful for them. And it's really surprising, I think, to anybody who hasn't experienced that working with a donor or being a donor, how much of their joy transfers over to you. You know, you really celebrate with them when they make that kind of gift. And when that mission and vision that they have as philanthropists aligns with the work that you're dedicating your time to and advances that mission, you know, that's a really terrific mission driven kind of good feeling. And, you know, in broadcast television, you know, there's certainly specific moments. You have a program, you know, you have a moment in time when a program goes on the air that's very specific. You know, the curtain goes up, here it is. But there's also, you know, little steps along the way that we know are tremendously important and tremendously meaningful, and they're only a step along the way. And, you know, it's really unclear whether it's the beginning, middle, or end, but there are little moments like that that are also, you know, moments to feel accomplishment and celebrate. So there's a lot of things. I guess we're talking about not-for-profits, so I can, you know, extol the beauty of not-for-profits, which, you know, kind of describes a business structure rather than a certain style. But, you know, thinking of it as mission-driven, there's lots of moments where you can feel like, yep, we've made some progress. Maybe it's big, maybe it's little, but it's all terrific.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We have about 7 minutes left. So my final question is, what is one final piece of advice you would give to students who are hoping to start in or are continuing their journey in the nonprofits field?
Sir, do the work that no one else wants to do. That is really how I excelled. Like, there's going to be things that come up like, oh, this should be done. Oh, this should be done. Don't hesitate to be the one to do those things, because that's going to help you expand your skill set and also get noticed, that you're that person that has ambition, that you're willing to go out of your way, maybe out of your comfort zone, to try something that should get done, but no one else is raising their hand to do. I have raised my hand over and over again, and I feel like that's a big part of why I've been able to excel so far, and I am going to continue to raise my hand for the rest of my career.
Yeah, I think that that's part of it, is being willing to do things that are sometimes way out of your comfort zone. Trying those different things. I keep going back to that whole be curious and be willing to try something different, because there's a lot of times that opportunities come up at a nonprofit that aren't necessarily obvious to you at first. You've got some, say, funding that comes in that's more targeted to something else, and being willing to be the person who takes that step and says, no, I'd really like to get involved with that, is often going to be something that's going to help you both get those skills that you might need. I'm doing work in software right now that I never imagined that I was going to be involved in. Those kinds of things where, oh, okay, learning how to operate this kind of a system and take it forward. That's an opportunity that you can explore, that isn't going to necessarily be rigidly within your job description.
I would say that don't limit yourself by your view of what you know. And one of the things that I did at Wisconsin was I took a class in industrial engineering, which had nothing to do with my degree in public administration or economics. And it turned out to be one of the most useful classes I've ever taken. Because it's all about logical process management. That's what industrial engineering does, is it looks at a process and then figures out what is the optimal way to find the solution. And it's just those kinds of things that it was almost accidental for me, but I've always thought that I can do things, even if I can't, and sometimes I can't, but all of it ends up adding to my toolkit, as the saying goes. So be adventurous.
I'd like to underscore the previous answers, especially Kate's. Show up, show up, show up. To sample everything that's in that organization and learn about it. Be that person who's reliable and dependable and willing and optimistic. You'll have plenty of chances to, moderate how much work you put in later or be negative later, but try being really positive and learning everything you can from people and modeling that kind of behavior and seeing what it feels like. I remember walking with big bosses and things and being a little bit surprised when they're the person who bends down and picks up a piece of paper or wrapper off the floor. Like, be that boss who cares so much that you're picking up the garbage off the floor. Just model being that person and see how that feels and how people react to you when you're that person. And I think too, if you can find the time for it, volunteer somewhere else. See how other organizations work and how other roles work. If you can find an organization that you're willing to be on the board of directors for a little while, or be part of a grant review panel, those kinds of experiences where you're kind of on the other side of the table from, being a starting employee at a not-for-profit are tremendously valuable, both immediately and later in your career. I think some of the most valuable things I've learned about managing a not-for-profit, I've learned as a volunteer for a not-for-profit, either on the board or in another way. So, I guess it's kind of, overcommit while you've got the time and energy for it, and sample all these different things, and you can make some choices later in life about how you want to manage your work-life balance, but don't be afraid to dive in all the way right away.
I think just to add to that, Eric, I think that you made a really important point about volunteering for other things, and being that volunteer, getting a lot of experience in doing something that may be very outside of your work area, but really exposes you to the structures of other organizations, gives you good feelings, networking, all those different kinds of things really benefit from being a volunteer.
Thank you so much for answering all of my questions and for taking an hour out of your, I'm sure, incredibly busy Tuesday to be here with us today and share all of your very diverse perspectives. That is all we have for today. We're all set to go, and thank you so much again for being here.